I've told this story maybe 100 times by now, to my brother, to my wife before she was my wife, to a couple of guys at a bar in Norfolk who didn't believe a word of it. And every single time I start it the same way because it's the part nobody expects. The most dangerous person I ever met in my life walked into that outpost carrying a clipboard. A clipboard, I swear to you. Let me back up. I was 23, a motor pool kid. That's it, that's all I was. My whole job in that war was keeping trucks alive in a place where the dust ate engines for breakfast. I wasn't a trigger puller, I wasn't anybody. When the brave-sounding stories get told, the mechanics don't usually make the cut. We're the guys with grease under our nails who fix the thing after the heroes break it. The outpost was called Kestrel. Don't bother looking it up. By the time you'd find it on any map, the map would already be wrong. It sat on a dry ridge above a valley that funneled everything, wind, sand, trouble, straight up toward us like the whole landscape was pointing a finger at our front gate. The air out there did something to you. In the morning it was cold enough to make your teeth ache, and by 10 it was an oven. The kind of heat that makes the horizon shake. You'd look out past the wire and the ground would just ripple like the earth itself couldn't sit still. There were maybe 40 of us, a mix, some infantry, a couple of medics, me and one other guy on vehicles, and a rotating cast of people who'd helicopter in, do something quiet, and helicopter out again without ever telling us their names. We learned not to ask. The day she came in, it was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were resupply, and resupply meant the bird kicked up so much dust the whole base went brown for 10 minutes. You'd taste it for an hour after. I was on the line, wrist deep in a transmission that had decided to die for the third time that month, when somebody nudged me and said, "New one came off the bird." I didn't even look up, soldier or suit. Suit, I think, got a clipboard. That made me snort. A clipboard out there was a joke. It meant paperwork. It meant somebody from up the chain who'd ask why our fuel logs didn't match and then leave before we could explain that fuel evaporates in heat like that. We called those people tourists. They came, they counted things, they wrote, they left. So when I finally wiped my hands and turned around, that's exactly what I saw. A woman, maybe early 40s, though out there everybody looked older. Plain khaki, no rank I could read, hair tied back tight under a faded cap. And yeah, a clipboard tucked under one arm like a schoolteacher. She wasn't big, she wasn't loud. She moved through the base slow and easy, looking at things, occasionally writing something down. A couple of the infantry guys watched her go by, and you could see them deciding in about half a second that she was nobody worth their attention. That was the thing about her, she let you decide that. She didn't fight it. She just let you walk right past her with your little judgment, and she filed it away somewhere quiet, and she waited. Her name on the manifest was Vance, M. Vance. Advisory, that was the whole job description, advisory. I'll be honest with you, I underestimated her harder than anybody. I want to own that right up front because it makes the rest of this matter more. The first words I ever said to her were rude. She'd wandered over to the motor pool that first afternoon, clipboard and all, and she stood watching me try to coax that dead transmission back to life. I was hot, I was frustrated, and I had grease in places grease should never go, and she just stood there, watching, writing the occasional note. After a few minutes of it I snapped, "You need something, because I've got about 6 hours of this and a flashlight that's dying." She didn't flinch. She had this way of looking at you, calm, flat, patient, that made you feel like you'd just shown her something about yourself you hadn't meant to. "Your number 2 truck," she said, "the one parked by the south wall. What about it?" "You've got it nose out, pointed at the gate." I shrugged. So if you ever have to leave in a hurry, that's the only one you don't have to back up first." A pause. "Whoever parked it that way was thinking, was it you?" It was me. I had done it on instinct, honestly, without a reason I could have put into words. "Yeah," I said. She gave the smallest nod, like I'd passed a test I didn't know I was taking, and she wrote something down and she walked off. I stood there feeling weirdly exposed and weirdly proud at the same time. I didn't understand it then. I do now. She'd just done the thing she did to everybody. She found the one true thing about you in 30 seconds and she held it. The guys gave her a nickname within 2 days. They called her the Auditor. Behind her back, obviously, because she walked around looking at everything and writing things down and never explaining herself. Somebody said she was probably from a budget office. Somebody else said she was checking up on the lieutenant. There were bets on how fast she'd leave. She didn't leave. That was the first strange thing. Tourists came and went on the same bird usually. They did their counting and they got out because nobody in their right mind wanted to spend a night at Kestrel if they didn't have to. But Vance stayed, one night, then another. She bunked in a corner of the supply tent, ate the same gray food we ate and didn't complain about any of it. And she watched. I started noticing where she put herself. It took me a while because she was good, she never made it obvious. But once I saw it I couldn't stop seeing it. She always sat where she could see the gate. In the chow line she stood with her back to a wall. When the perimeter guards changed shift she happened to be outside, stretching her legs, watching the handoff. Always casual, always a reason. Always positioned. One evening I mentioned it to Ray's, the other vehicle guy. Older than me, done a couple tour, didn't spook easy. You notice the auditor, I said, how she sits. Ray's looked over at her. She was leaning against the supply tent, sipping coffee out of a dented cup, looking at nothing in particular. Except she wasn't looking at nothing. She was looking at the ridge line. Ray's watched her for a long moment, and something passed over his face that I didn't like. That's not a budget lady, he said quietly. What is she then? He didn't answer right away. He took out a cigarette, didn't light it, just held it. I don't know, he said finally, but I've seen people sit like that before, and every time something bad was about to happen and they already knew it. I laughed it off. Of course I did. I was 23 and I thought the world made sense. The next few days, the valley got quiet, and out there quiet wasn't peace. Quiet was a held breath. The locals who usually moved through the lower trails with their goats stopped coming. The little market down in the village that you could just barely see through binoculars, it thinned out, then emptied. The radio chatter we picked up got sparse and clipped. The lieutenant, a good guy named Hollies who was maybe 2 years older than me and trying very hard to seem like 10, called it nerves. Said the locals got jumpy this time of year. Said we'd be fine. Vance, the auditor, the budget lady, said nothing at all. But I caught her one morning standing at the wire looking down into that empty valley, and she had her clipboard down at her side for once forgotten, and her face was, I don't know how to describe it, not scared, the opposite of scared, focused, like a person reading a letter they'd been expecting for a long time. I walked up next to her, I don't know why, maybe because everybody else thought she was furniture and some part of me had started to suspect she wasn't. It's too quiet, I said, just to say something. She didn't turn her head. Yes. Lieutenant says it's nothing. I know what the lieutenant says. We stood there, the wind came up the valley and pushed dust across the wire and I had to squint. You think something's coming, I said. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said in this even, almost gentle voice, I think people who wait this long and this patiently usually have a reason. And I think the reason is parked about 4 kilometers that way behind the second ridge, and it has been there for 3 days. I stared at her. How could you possibly know that? For the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was thin and a little sad, the smile of somebody who'd hoped to be wrong. Because that's where I'd be, she said. And she picked her clipboard back up and she walked off to write something down, and I stood at that wire with the cold morning crawling down my spine for reasons I couldn't have explained. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on my cot listening to the generator hum and the wind worry at the canvas, and I kept thinking about the way she'd said it. That's where I'd be, like she wasn't guessing at all, like she was remembering. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself she was just a strange, sharp lady with a clipboard and too much imagination. I was so wrong, it still makes my chest tight to think about. Because 3 days later, everything I thought I knew about who's dangerous and who isn't, who matters and who doesn't, got blown apart along with half the south wall. And the woman with the clipboard was the only reason any of us walked out of there alive. It started at dawn. The bad ones always do. I think there's a reason for that. There's a moment right before the sun comes up when everybody's at their lowest, the night guard's exhausted, the day guard's still half asleep, the whole world's soft and gray and slow. I was already up, only because the transmission had finally beaten me and I'd given up on sleep to go yell at it some more. So I was the one near the motor pool when the first round came in. I want to tell you it was like the movies. It wasn't. In the movies you get music, you get a build-up, you get a hero turning toward the threat in slow motion. In real life there's just a sound, a flat, ugly asterisk crack that's wrong in a way your body understands before your brain does, and then the south wall isn't a wall anymore. It's a cloud of dirt and noise, and you're on the ground and you don't remember choosing to be there. My ears went to a high whine, everything got muffled and far away. I remember looking at my own hands like they belonged to somebody else. Then the second round hit, and the third, and the whole base woke up screaming. It was an ambush, a real one, well planned. They came up the dead ground on the south side, exactly the side Vance had been starring at for a week, and they came in numbers and they came knowing our layout. Later we'd figure out they'd been watching us as long as we'd been ignoring the valley. They knew where the guards stood. They knew where the ammunition was. They knew the one stretch of wall the morning sun put in shadow, and that's the one they hit. Lieutenant Hollis tried. I'll give him that forever. He got up and he started shouting orders and he got men onto the line. But he was 25 and he'd never seen anything like this, and you could hear it in his voice, that note of a person who'd practiced the words 100 times and was only now learning they don't fit your mouth right when it's real. Within 10 minutes it was coming apart. Comms were down, they'd hit our antenna early, which told you everything about how much they'd planned. We had wounded. We had men firing in 3 different directions because nobody could tell where the threat was coming from. Hollis was bleeding from somewhere on his head and trying to hold a radio that wasn't talking to anybody. And I was crouched behind the engine block of my own dead truck, the number 2 truck, the one parked nose out, with no weapon I knew how to use well, and the absolute certainty, cold and complete, that I was going to die at 23 in a place nobody would ever be able to find on a map. That's when she moved. I'll never forget it as long as I live. The auditor, the budget lady, the woman with the clipboard. She came out of the supply tent low and fast and smooth, and the clipboard was gone, and in her hands was a rifle I hadn't even known she had, and she moved like, okay. You know how everybody else in a firefight moves in jerks and panic, ducking and flinching? She didn't. She moved like water finding the low ground. Every step had a reason. She used cover I didn't even know was cover. She crossed 20 meters of open dirt that nobody else could have crossed, and she did it like she was strolling to the chow line. She slid in next to Hollis behind the wrecked guard post. I was close enough to hear it. The shooting was everywhere, but I'll never forget the calm in her voice cutting under it. "Lieutenant," she said, "look at me, you with me." Hollis was wild-eyed, bleeding, the radio dead in his hand. "Comms are down, I can't reach anybody there inside the..." "Lieutenant," just his rank flat steady, and it landed on him like a hand on the shoulder. He stopped. "I need you to do one thing for me, just one, can you do that?" He nodded. "Get every man you can to the north side of the motor pool, not the wall. The motor pool, behind the trucks, and keep them there. Don't push out, don't be heroes, just hold that line and keep low. Can you give me that?" "Who?" Holly stared at her. "Who are you?" And she was already moving, already up and gone, calling back over her shoulder, "The person who's about to win this. Move." I don't know what it was in her voice. I've thought about it for years. There's a thing that happens rarely, once or twice in a life if you're unlucky enough to need it, where one person is so completely without panic that their calm becomes contagious. It spreads. It's the only thing in the world stronger than fear, and she had it. She had it in a quantity I have never seen before or since. Men started moving. Not because of rank, she had no rank anybody could see. They moved because some animal part of their brain recognized that there was, finally, somebody in that base who knew exactly what they were doing, and it followed. She got to the motor pool. She got to me, actually, because I was already there, frozen behind my truck. She crouched next to me, and for 1 second those flat, calm eyes were on mine, and she said, "You, mechanic, number 2 truck, does it run?" No, the transmission, it's... "Does it asterisk move? I don't need it to run. Can it roll downhill in neutral with the wheels straight?" I stared at her. Yeah, it'd roll. "Good, I need you to be ready to do exactly what I tell you in about 4 minutes and not 1 second before. Can you do that?" I don't know where I found the word, yes. "Good man." And she touched my shoulder once, and it was the single most steadying thing anybody has ever done for me, and then she was up at the corner of the building, rifle to her shoulder, looking out at the breach in the south wall. What she did next, I only half understood at the time. Now, with everything I learned after, I understand all of it. She'd read the whole fight in about 90 seconds. She'd seen that the attackers had committed to the south breach. They were pouring through it because it had worked, because it was the path of success, and that's the thing about a successful attack, it pulls you in. She'd seen that they had a support element on the high ground to the east, gunners covering the assault. And she'd seen the one thing nobody else had time to see. that the attackers in their confidence had bunched up. They were funneling through that one breach in the wall, and a funnel works both ways. She didn't try to fight all of them, that was the genius. There were too many to fight, so she didn't fight them, she moved asterisk them. She put a few precise, devastating shots into the support gunners on the high ground, and I mean precise, the kind of shooting where every round means something, and suddenly the attackers' cover from above went quiet. That changed the math in the head of whoever was leading them. And then she had Holly's men show just enough resistance from the motor pool, controlled, disciplined, not too much, to convince the attackers that the fight was won and the survivors were running north. She was building a story for them. She was lying to the enemy with the shape of the battle itself, telling them, "You've broken through, they're fleeing, push the breach, finish it." And they believed it, of course they did, it's what they wanted to believe. They came pouring through that breach in the south wall, dozens of them, right into the open killing ground of the motor pool yard, exactly where she wanted them, exactly where the angles were hers and not theirs. That's when she looked back at me, and she said the 4 words I'd been waiting 4 minutes for. "Now the truck, release." I didn't even think. I yanked the brake, threw it in neutral and shoved, and the number 2 truck nose out, wheels straight, the way I'd parked it a week ago for no reason I could name, rolled forward down the slope of the yard, straight into the center of that funnel of attackers. A 2-ton wall of steel cutting them off from their own escape route and splitting their assault right down the middle. And in the chaos of that, in the half-second where the whole attack stuttered and lost its shape, she opened up, and Holly's men opened up from the north, and it was over faster than I can tell it. Not the whole fight, but the moment, the hinge, the single instant where a defeat turned into something else. She found it, and she stood in the middle of it, calm as a person reading the morning paper, and she turned the whole thing around. I remember the quiet after. Not real quiet, there was still shooting in pockets, still men yelling, but the asterisk kind asterisk of quiet, the change in the air, where everybody on our side suddenly understood that we were going to live, and everybody on theirs understood that they were not going to win. And in the middle of the yard, in the dust and the smoke, stood the woman with the clipboard. No clipboard now, just the rifle lowered and that flat calm face looking out at the wreckage of an attack that should have killed every one of us. She wasn't the budget lady anymore. I didn't know what she was yet. But I was about to find out, because over the eastern ridge in the rising sun, the cavalry was coming. And the first thing they did when they saw her, before they did anything else, was something I will remember until the day I die. The relief came in fast and low, 2 birds skimming the ridgeline, and the men who came off them were not like us. You could tell from 100 meters. The way they moved, the way they spread, the way they cleared ground, it was the same quality I'd seen in Vance, that same economy, that same total absence of wasted motion. These were the real thing, SEALs, a team that had been inbound the moment our comms cut out because somebody somewhere had been watching that valley as carefully as Vance had. They poured into the base and they secured it in minutes, and the remaining attackers melted back into the valley they'd come from. The fight bled out of them the second they realized professionals had arrived. I was sitting on the ground by then, against the wheel of the truck that had saved us, shaking the way you shake when the thing is over and your body finally lets you feel it. Ray's was next to me, alive, gripping my shoulder. Holly's was getting his head wrapped by a medic and looking 10 years older than he had at dawn. And the SEAL team leader, a big, weathered guy, a senior chief, the kind of man who'd clearly seen everything twice, came striding through the base, scanning faces, looking for someone. He found her. She was standing by the broken south wall, and she'd picked the clipboard back up from somewhere, which I think she did on purpose, some private joke only she understood. She looked again like a woman who'd come to count fuel logs, plain khaki, faded cap, nothing about her that said what she'd just done. The senior chief stopped about 3 feet from her, and this big, hard man, this veteran of God knows what, came to attention, full attention, straightened up like a recruit on his first day. And he said loud enough that half the base heard it, loud enough that I will hear it in my head forever. "Ma'am, it's an honor. The whole community knows the name." He paused, and something like awe moved across that weathered face. "We were told Viper was out of the game, we were told you retired." And she, the budget lady, the auditor, M. Vance, advisory, looked at him with that thin, tired smile, and she said, "I did retire, somebody just forgot to tell the valley." I sat there in the dirt, and I felt the whole world rearrange itself. Because I knew that name. Everybody in that life knew that name, even a motor pool kid like me. Viper wasn't a person to us. Viper was a story. A legend the older guys told at night, the kind you half believed. The operative who'd done the impossible things, the ones that didn't make the news because they couldn't. The one who'd walked into situations nobody walks out of and walked out anyway. There were a dozen versions of the stories and we'd assumed all of them were exaggerated, the way all legends are. Viper was supposed to be a giant, a myth, something larger than life. And she'd been sleeping in the corner of our supply tent for a week, eating our gray food, watching our gate, while 40 of us walked past her and decided she was nobody. The senior chief's men, these hardened operators, they gathered around at a respectful distance and you could see it on every one of their faces. The same thing I was feeling. They were standing in the presence of someone they'd only ever heard about. The realest kind of famous, the kind that lives in whispers. And here's the part that still gets me, the part I think about most. She didn't enjoy it. She could have, God knows she'd earned it. She could have stood there and let them look at her like a legend. Instead, she turned away from all of it, away from the senior chief and his awe and his men, and she walked across that broken base, straight to where the medics had laid out our wounded. She knelt down next to the worst of them, a young infantry kid, couldn't have been 19, gut-shot and gray and scared out of his mind, and she took his hand and she leaned down close, and I heard her say, in that same flat, calm voice she'd used in the middle of the firefight, "Hey, look at me, you're going to be okay, the bird's right there, you hear it, that's your ride home, you did good today, you hear me, you did good." And the kid who'd been thrashing and panicking went still, calmed by the same thing that had calmed Holly's, that had calmed all of us, that had calmed me behind a truck in the worst moment of my life. That's when I understood what she actually was, not the rifle, not the legend, not the code name. She was the calm. In the middle of the worst thing, she was the still point everybody else could hold onto. And she spent it, that incredible, rare, precious thing she had, she spent it on a scared 19-year-old in the dirt instead of on the men who wanted to worship her. They flew the wounded out first, then most of us in waves. The base was finished. You don't hold a place that's been read that completely by an enemy. We packed what mattered and we burned what didn't and we left Kestrel to the valley. I saw her one more time before the end. I was loading the last of my tools onto a bird, old habit, couldn't leave good tools behind even then, and she walked up beside me, clipboard under her arm again, as if none of it had happened. "Number 2 truck," she said. I looked at her, "Ma'am, you parked it nose out a week ago for no reason you could explain." She tilted her head, studying me with those calm eyes. "Do you understand now why that mattered?" I did. I understood that a small thing I'd done on instinct, a week before, with no idea it would ever matter, that small thing had become the hinge the whole battle turned on. That she'd seen it the first day, filed it away, and built a plan around it when the time came. "You saw it," I said, "the first day, the truck, you already had it in your head." "I see everything the first day," she said. "It's not a gift, it's just what's left after you've done this long enough." And then, quieter, almost to herself, "You should get out, you know, you're a good mechanic. The world needs more of those and fewer of me." I never forgot that. Fewer of me. The most dangerous person I ever met, the legend, the myth made flesh, and what she wanted, standing in the wreckage of a battle she'd single-handedly turned, was a world that needed fewer of her. The bird lifted off. I watched the base get small below us, the broken wall, the dead trucks, the scar of the breach. And I watched her on the last bird out, a small figure in plain khaki, indistinguishable from anybody, completely unremarkable. That was the whole point of her, I think. That was the secret of her. The most dangerous people don't look dangerous. The legends don't look like legends. They walk through your life carrying clipboards and they let you decide they're nobody and they file your judgment away somewhere quiet and they wait. I did get out, eventually, just like she told me to. Good mechanic, like she said. I've got a shop now and a family and a quiet life that I love, and I don't think any of it would exist if a woman I underestimated completely hadn't told me to go build it. I never learned her real name. M. Vance was as close as I ever got, and I'm fairly sure that wasn't it. I never saw her again. I have no idea if she's still alive. People like that, you don't get to know how their story ends. But every once in a while, when somebody in my shop looks past one of the quiet ones, the junior guy, the kid who doesn't say much, the person who doesn't look like anybody, I think about her. And I say the only thing I really learned out there, the thing she taught 40 of us in the worst dawn of our lives, the thing I'll be saying until I'm gone. Be very careful who you decide is nobody. Because the most dangerous person in the room is almost always the one you never looked at twice.